This is Dan, and this is the Napkin Academy. Our lesson now is Visual Thinking Process Step 2, which we remember is seeing, but it's seeing Part 2, the 6 types of problems we see. Another way I like to think about this lesson is we're going to give it a funny name. We're going to call it Einstein's Horse. Now, I don't know if Einstein ever said anything about a horse, but Einstein did say something about problem solving. You know, Einstein was constantly trying to solve really complex problems and often doing it extremely well. And you know what Einstein said? He said, if I had 60 minutes to solve a problem, I would spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem, and I would spend 5 minutes thinking about the solution. And once again, Einstein nailed it, because the problem for most of us is that we don't know how to see solutions because we don't know how to see problems. We simply don't know very well how to see the pieces of a problem. The reason why I call this Einstein's horse is because you'll remember the drawing we did of the horse. Now, for many of us, we think we have to draw a horse, and we start out with say, oh my gosh, how would I draw a horse? This is the way we tend to look at most problems. But remember how we did it? We said we know how to see a horse. We know how to look at a horse. A horse is composed of a bunch of simple shapes. And we can draw those shapes, and we can now see our horse and see what we need to do with it. Einstein's horse. The problem, of course, all along has been that when it comes to seeing problems, we've lacked a good visual coordinate system, but we know that we just came up with a good one, our 6-dimensional coordinate system. Super quick review: who and what, how much, where, when, how, and why. This is the way that we are going to learn to see problems so that we can actually solve them. And the reason that this is going to work is because in the entire world, believe it or not, it is possible to say that there are only 6 types of problems. And you know, I'm not really just making this up. The fact is, our mind looks at the world in one way of saying that there are just 6 types of problems that I can solve. Now, there are an infinite number of variations, and we can go on and on. But what we want to do here is just the same way we do our horse. What are the pieces that make up a problem? Problem type number 1. Problem type number 1 are problems of who and what. Problems of who and what. Our most elemental kind of problems. These are the problems that say things like, you know, who are all the players? Or problems like, what makes this thing different from this thing? Or problems that say, okay, who is really in charge? Who is the boss up here underneath, above all of these other people who are underneath him? Problem type number 1, who and what problems. Problem type number 2, how much problems. We're going to typically represent these with a chart. These are problems that typically have to do with things like money. Do we have enough money, or whatever it might be, time, space, freedom, people, in order to achieve what we want? Do we have enough? The other type of question is turning that around. How much money, time, space, people do we need in order to turn this into this? Do we have enough? The other type of question, problem related to how much, is simply how many are there out there? How many of those things are there that I need to deal with? These are the kinds of problems that make up the how much set. The third essential type of problem that we can face are problems of where. Where is one thing in relation to another one? The problems of this sort go back to questions like where do all the pieces fit? Where does this one go, and 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 this one go to make that thing? The other types of questions about where are, where are we? Relative to the position of everything else, are we here? Is our business over here? Where do we want it to be? Do we want it to be up here? Do we want it to be over here? Where are we? Where questions relate to, well, where do we want to be? If we are over here, do we want to be up here? Or do we want to be over here? Or do we want to be over here? Where do we want to be? The fourth type of essential question are questions of when. When does one thing happen in relation to another thing in terms of time and sequence? The questions that are when sorts of questions, when sorts of problems say, well, what happens first and second and third? What is the sequence in which these things take place? And when do we need to get everything done to meet our timeline, our deadline? When do we need to get it all? When do these take place? Do they take place now? Did they take place in the past? Will they take place in the future? Questions, problems of when. The fifth type of problem are problems of how. How are we going to make this thing become that thing? How are we going to turn our company that makes squares into a company that makes circles? How questions become the kinds of questions that say, well, how does this happen? What sort of causal feedback loops take place in what I continually see? What will happen to Y if I change X? What will happen to this if I change that? Those are the kinds of questions of how. How can I make it all work? How can I achieve this result as opposed to that result? Questions and problems of how. And the last, the mother of all of the big question types, big problem types, is of course why. Why? 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 Why does this thing eternally happen? The types of why questions really combine all of the others that we've seen into the essential central question of why does this always happen? Why do I always get this result? Why, when I have this and I do this, do I always end up with that? Those are the big questions of why. And they can summarize into the most important one of all, which is, why are we doing it this way? Is this the only way to make this thing happen? Why are we doing it this way? Is there another, perhaps better way we could do the same thing? These are the questions of why. Now, the reason why this is important, of course, is because as we face our big, nasty problem, we want to be able to see it well so that we can see it through. To summarize then, there are 6 types of problems that we face. There are problems of who and what, problems of how much, problems of where, problems of when, problems of how, and the fundamental underlying problems of why. Six types of problems, 6W coordinate system. This is going to be the tool that's going to help us see the problems that we really face so that we can come up with good ways of fixing them.